the parties did not switch sides. Blacks did become Democrats. They used to be Republicans. Guess when they switched? In the 1930s. Look it up. In 1936, FDR got 71% of the black vote. Overwhelming majority. Why? Because of the economic benefits of the New Deal. It had nothing to do with race. The Democratic Party in 1936 was indisputably the party of segregation and the KKK. Blacks were going from the party of Lincoln to the party of the KKK. Why? Again, I don't blame them. This was the Great Depression. Everybody was under severe economic strain. The benefits of the New Deal, however meager, were an incentive. But what I'm saying is this was not a switch produced by race. And the South, which was Democratic for a long time, did become Republican. When was that process completed? In the 1980s, in the Reagan era. So was Reagan campaigning on bigotry? No. Reagan was campaigning on patriotism, on free markets, on Christianity, on anti-communism. Here's what I'm saying. If you do a chart of the South, you will see that through the 20th century, the South becomes less and less racist. There is no dispute on this data. There's a volume of it. As the South becomes less racist, it becomes increasingly Republican. So the racism of the South runs in inverse relationship to its affiliation with the Republican Party. And when people talk about Nixon's Southern strategy, oh, Nixon appealed to the Deep South by appealing to bigotry. No, Nixon was from California. You think Nixon didn't know that if he made racist appeals to the Old South, he would lose the rest of the country? Nixon knew that. Nixon did not appeal to the Deep South. He didn't win the Deep South. Who won the Deep South? George Wallace. Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, and Wallace was a Democrat. Nixon won the Upper South. Nixon appealed to non-racists in the Upper South. Now, this is by way of a brief introduction to the race debate. And I want to pivot and talk a little bit more about a related debate, which is the fascism debate. The fascism debate. Because since Trump's election, we've been hearing a lot. Trump's a fascist, the conservatives are fascists, the GOP is the neo-Nazi party, and all of this is based upon a big lie that goes long before Trump. In fact, it goes right back to World War II. And the big lie is simply that fascism and Nazism are on the right. They're right-wing. Now think about it. When people say this, they very rarely explain it. They just assume it. And in fact, so powerful is this big lie that many people who don't know better, including me until recently, believed it. Oh yeah, fascism. Communism is left-wing. Fascism is right-wing. Now, superficially, I asked myself, where did I get that idea? And I know where I got it. I got it from World War II itself, because the Soviet Union was on this side, and the fascists were on that side. So I figured if the communists were on the left, the fascists must be on the right. And at that time, I wasn't smart enough to realize that actually, sister ideologies sometimes have very bitter fratricidal wars against each other. Consider, for example, the Catholics and the Protestants. Or consider the Shia and the Sunni, who are both inside the house of Islam. They agree on 99% of their beliefs. Their disagreement is only over the baton of secession, and yet they've been fighting for centuries. So the fact that two guys are fighting does not in any way prove or even suggest that they must be ideological opposites. Sometimes they are competing for followers, for territory, for power. Once I began to research fascism, I realized that fascism has always been on the left. In fact, it was on the far left. Mussolini was the most famous Marxist in Italy. When he founded the fascist party, he got a telegram of congratulations from Lenin. Why? Because Lenin recognized Mussolini as a fellow revolutionary of the left. What was Hitler's party called? the National Socialist Party. Now, remarkably, today, the socialism has somehow been taken out of National Socialism. And all that's left is the nationalism. And so the left is able to say, well, Trump's a fascist. Look, he's an ultra-nationalist. Trump wants to make America great again. Didn't Hitler want to make Germany great again? Now, while nationalism is in fact a descriptive feature of fascism, it is. It's actually not a defining feature. In other words, when you have an ideology, you have things that are central to it and things that are sort of incidental. Okay, let's look at nationalism for a minute. I'm from India, I mentioned. Gandhi was a nationalist. Mandela was a nationalist in South Africa. All the anti-colonial leaders, Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, were nationalists. Stalin was a nationalist. So was Abraham Lincoln, by the way. So was Winston Churchill. Now, are all these people fascists? No, obviously not. So the equation between nationalism and fascism is stupid. It's not a real equation. It is an effort to smuggle something over that isn't actually the defining feature of it. If you want to know what fascism is, Mussolini tells you. Mussolini is the founder of fascism, by the way, not Hitler. Mussolini came to power in 1922, Hitler came to power in 1933. Hitler looked up to Mussolini. Mussolini was the first, set up the first fascist regime in the world. So Mussolini goes, this is what fascism is. Everything in the state and nothing outside the state. For Mussolini, the state is kind of like an organism, a living creature. And all of us are cells inside of it. The cell is irrelevant, it's unimportant, it has no rights. The only value of the cell is the degree to which it serves the organism, the state. So I ask you, does the fascist credo sound like the platform of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party? In the 2012 convention, Obama unfurled the slogan, "We all belong to the government." That is the exact opposite of America. America is, the government belongs to us. The government is actually here to serve us as individuals. The fascist credo is that the individual is insignificant, the individual is a drop of water inside that ocean that we call the state. Now, I want to look for a moment at what is happening on the campus today. Because if you look at these Antifa guys, they wear masks, they wear black uniforms, they carry bike locks and baseball bats as weapons. Their objective is to drive speakers off the campus. These guys are the exact physical and historical equivalent of Mussolini's black shirts of the 20s or Hitler's brown shirts of the 30s. That's exactly what those guys did. That's how they looked. That's how they talked. There's only one difference, and that is that the old fascists said, we're fascists. The fascists of today purport to be anti-fascists. And they say things like, we've got to get rid of hate speech. I listened to Ben Shapiro's talk at Berkeley. I didn't hear any hate speech. I heard a defense of modern American conservatism, which is nothing more than a defense of classical liberalism. If that's hate speech, it's not. There's nothing hateful about it. Now, what does this mean for us today? As I say, I've been throwing out all kinds of things, and I was a little hesitant to do it because what they say in persuasion is you cannot persuade somebody to change their worldview. You can't persuade them to take the whole lens out of the camera. You can persuade them to change their mind about this little thing or that little thing, and maybe that will later lead to a transformation. But I said to myself, that approach would work if there's another speaker coming in 2 months from now to Lock Haven, but since I'm the first speaker in, I believe, 14 years, we probably have to wait another 14 years before you hear a point of view that is out of sync with the reigning orthodoxy. And I just want to leave you with a thought. is this actually what you're paying for? Is this what you actually call a liberal education? An education in uniformity? An education where if some guy comes from the outside, it doesn't matter if he's a non-white immigrant, and tells you stuff that upsets you because your professors have been lying to you, therefore you're uncomfortable, therefore you got to leave, you got to drive him out, you've got to run for a safe space, take a bath, smell a rose. This is actually not what growing up is all about. Look, you know, college is that transitional point between being a kid, needing to be spoon-fed and taken care of. And college does a little bit of that, and that's okay. But the whole point of college is to get you ready for what is actually life itself. Here we are in life, and we are flung into the world. Nobody tells us why we're here. Nobody tells us what's going to come after death. This is actually life. And adult life is the equivalent of that. You're prepared as well as you can, and you're going to be flung into the world. Don't go into the world a buffoon. Don't go into the world having never examined your own thoughts, turned your assumptions into questions. That's really what college is all about. So in that spirit, I'm here to speak. Not to convince you that everything I say is right. You can check it all out for yourself. What I would suggest is to identify 2 or 3 of the most startling things that I've said that you say to yourself, this can't be right. And I'm telling you, it is right, but don't take my word for it. You verify it. And if you find out that I'm wrong, put it on social media because it will go like wildfire. But if I'm right, then you have to ask yourself a different question. How is it that I can be 21 years old and consider myself a pretty smart guy or gal? And not only did I not know this, but it's like blown me away. I can't believe it. There's no way it could be true. How could I possibly take that stance toward knowledge? You're almost acting like the guy, the Greek in the 5th century BC, where someone tells you, you know, there are more planets than the 7 stars you see in the sky. And you go, no way. That can't possibly be true. Well, you can forgive the Greek in the 5th century because he had no method of discovering anything else. But you do. And at your fingertips to boot. So let me leave you with the idea that, for me, this is not an argument, it's not a fight. It's part of an educational process of opening our minds. To me, one of the beautiful things about America, when I first came here, is simply the idea that people would question their own beliefs, and college is sort of based on that, and I love that. All my writing is based upon that. Even in my latest book, The Big Lie, I mean, I've been listening to all these big pundits. Rachel Maddow, Bill Maher, Chris Matthews, Van Jones. They bloviate about fascism since the election. Now I have a book out. All these guys know me. I've been on Bill Maher's show 30 times. But I can't get on any of their shows. They've all gone down major rabbit holes. Why? Because they don't even dare to put me on for 60 seconds for fear that they will look like complete fools. So the problems that we see at Lockhaven are not unique. They're happening in the culture generally. And that's a very bad thing. That's a very bad America that we've gotten into where this kind of debate can occur. So you notice I'm not making a case for Trump. I'm not defending Trump. I'm just defending the right to knowledge, to historical truth. And I think America would make a lot of progress if the Democratic Party would simply say, yes, we are in fact the party of slavery, of segregation, of Jim Crow, of the Ku Klux Klan, of racial terrorism, and opposition to the civil rights movement. That is our actual history, and we are willing to admit to it. The moment we have that truth, the sky will part, and very good things will begin to happen. Thank you very much.
To the Sociology Club and Young Americans for Liberty. Right now we're going to have a question-answer session. Mr. D'Souza is kind enough to engage in discourse. So if you have a question, if you can line up along here, and over on the my right-hand side, just go through the back and ask or make a statement, and we'll engage in some sort of discourse. Maybe you didn't agree with something or something you didn't understand. So come over to my left, and we'll go ahead and ask the questions.
I actually had a question. So in the world, in America today, a lot of media sources don't exactly double check their facts, or they put up stuff that may or may not be true, and there's a lot of conflict. In high school, last year, we were doing a study, and one kid presented something, and over the summer we were talking about it, and I just wanted to know I wanted to like double check, see if this is actually factual. After President Trump won the election, a lot of these major colleges and what's supposed to be higher academic colleges started opening more safe spaces where kids could take a break from studying, cancel a homework assignment to go and color and draw and listen to music safe space. Now, there's a lot of proof about that. But well, my question is, there was also reports of a group of people who, and this is their actual job, they get paid to do this supposedly, go around to different campuses, go around to different homes, to different states, and just be there with people who are so emotionally distraught by the fact that the Republican Party, or the fact that Trump won, that these people get paid to come into their homes and just hug them, cuddle with them, be with them, just exist like a giant teddy bear. They get paid. That's their job in life, because there are people out there who just supposedly can't handle the fact that their party lost, or they're a third party, that the Democrat Party lost that much. Is there any notable sources regarding this matter?
Well, the truth is, I don't know. That is the notion of, in the old days you'd have itinerant preachers who'd go and set up a tent from one town to the other. The idea of an itinerant kind of grief counseling community that moves from town to town, identifying grief-stricken Democrats. I've never heard of that. Now, what I have heard of is the fact that there are paid protesters who show up on campus. The college Republicans at Berkeley, for example, tell me that a lot of those activists aren't Berkeley students. That the Berkeley left goes to Oakland and just finds people that they can round up, who will come to campus, who like to beat people up, who like to take on the cops. And so there's an outside agitating element. I also note that the mayor of Berkeley is very supportive of these protests. He's the guy who told the cops to stand down. So when I talk about fascism, I actually don't want to suggest that Antifa is the worst kind of fascist in America. No. The fascism of the street is never as dangerous as the fascism of the institutions. So the mayor, the fascist with a badge, the powerful people in Hollywood who will destroy your career if you are on the wrong side of the aisle, the powerful academic deans who have multi-million-dollar endowments who can destroy the life of a young academic because you dissent from orthodoxy, Google, which fires people for writing a memo. This is the fascism of the institutions, and it is more dangerous than the fascism of the street. Okay?
Next question.
I would mean to ask you, you come from India, right?
Right.
And you immigrated to America.
Right.
I mean to ask you, the United States of America still believe it's the greatest country in the world. It's a republic, former British colony, and it's one of the most, pretty much the most democratic country in the world. I couldn't help but notice that other countries as well, like Canada, Australia, and your native India, were also British colonies, and they were also one of the more democratic countries in the world. Was there something that the British did right that the other, or great European powers, the Spanish and the French, did wrong that promoted democracy?
That's a very difficult and profound question because it involves historical causation. It's one thing if I say things like, the Ku Klux Klan was a domestic terrorist arm of the Democratic Party. I'm just making a descriptive, factual statement. But when you're trying to trace the origin of things, now I will say, there was no such thing as parliamentary liberal democracy in India. Now, I don't think that the British came to India bearing gifts. They didn't come to give the Indians that. But, against their intentions, they did. And by that I mean that the Indian independence leaders, many of them, Gandhi, Nehru, others, studied in England, some in South Africa. They picked up the ideas of parliamentary liberalism through the British. So I guess what one could say is that colonialism was, against its intention, a transmission belt that did in fact bring Western ideas to the non-Western world. And that is also true, by the way, of the Spanish and Portuguese colonialisms. They didn't bring capitalism or democracy, but they did bring other things. And so the westernization, for example, of large parts of South America today, of large parts of Africa, Christianity was also brought, you may say, on the transmission belt of colonialism. I think it's a mixed record, but the anti-colonial attack on colonialism was so one-sided that it lost sight of some of these things, and Indian scholars now are taking a sort of more balanced view. I mean, no one's calling for the return of the British. We don't need that. But, while nobody wants the British to go back, notice that in India, an extremely hot country, now, if you go to Indian law courts, or even if you go on the train in India, you will see millions of Indian men wearing suits and sweating profusely. Well, think about that. When the British left, the Indians could have gone, this is fantastic, let's take off the hot suits. But no, the Indian judges wear wigs. They speak English. They use Western procedures of parliamentary democracy. The Indians on their own decided to keep those things even when the British went home. Very telling fact.
That's so I'm guessing.
Yeah, in the case of the Americans, it was a lot easier because these were British settlers who brought Athens and Jerusalem with them. So they did it naturally. But for the Indians, all of this was imposed on them, and still they decided to keep it. It's almost like a captive deciding to continue to do things that were previously shoved down your throat by your captors. Okay?
Hi, how are you? You mentioned earlier in your speech that Democrats took down statues in the South to try to blame the South for slavery. However, there have been other statues taken down in Brooklyn, New York, New York, and Ohio. So I'm just curious what your argument is for that as far as taking down more than Confederate statues.
Well, now let's be careful. I read about some defacing of the Jefferson Monument, and even some defacing of Abraham Lincoln, believe it or not. Are you talking about Confederate statues in the North?
We have flags honoring Lee, who was a slave owner, removed from an Episcopal church on August 16th in Brooklyn, New York. We have some in D.C., a Confederate soldier.
Okay.
Baltimore.
All right. I get it. Well, history is a case where history is traveling into the past the same way that we can travel today to other countries, right? It's a form of, it's a kind of journey. And if we want to do history, we should try to imagine what this history reflects. So let's start with the Confederate soldier. Who was this Confederate soldier? By and large, this guy was a farmer, right? Or he was a field hand. This is not a slave owner. This is a guy who fought in the Civil War for one reason alone. To quote actually one Confederate soldier who was immortalized in one of the historical archives of the... They asked him, why are you fighting? You don't have slaves. Why are you fighting this war? He goes, because the Yankees are down here. end quote. That's why he fought. It's the only world he knows, and here's a bunch of Yankees with guns trying to take that away. And this was not a way of life that involved slavery in any sense. This was the only world he knew. And this poor, bedraggled Confederate soldier is now the symbol of American national villainy. Give me a break. Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee was a man of such distinction that Abraham Lincoln offered him the command of the Union Army. The only reason that Lee said no is Lee did not want to march the Union Army and kill his own relatives in Virginia. So Lee was loyal to his own, what Burke calls this little platoon, the place we grow up, the only world we know. Lee was anti-slavery. He condemned slavery. He recognized it existed, but Lee denounced it. Lee inherited some slaves on his wife's side. He did. But here's my point. Lee was a military man. Lee was at West Point. Lee was not a plantation owner. While Lee inherited the slaves on his wife's side, he wasn't running a plantation. He's not. If you're looking for a prototypical plantation guy who's driving the slaves, don't look for Robert E. Lee. He was wearing a military uniform in Washington, D.C.
But I also feel like it's not acceptable. Like, there's no difference to me whether you were a slave owner as a plantation owner or a slave owner, whether you had them in your home or inherited them from your wife. So I don't...
I'm not saying there's a moral difference. Here's what I'm saying. Let's look at it from Abraham Lincoln's point of view for just a second. Lincoln basically said, see, the founders expected slavery to go away. They thought it would. And then in the 1790s, Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, and slavery had a huge boom in the South. And slavery was critical to the Southern economy and to the Industrial Revolution. So here was this whole way of life in America, right here. Now, the British abolished slavery, but slavery wasn't deeply planted. So Abraham Lincoln said, look, you cannot condemn people as evil who have inherited this way of life if they're willing to condemn it, because we have to find a way to get rid of it. So simply to condemn it as if there is some artificial utopian world that we can get to, Lincoln's point was we have to go from here to there. And for many years, Lincoln supported gradual emancipation, compensated emancipation, all kinds of schemes. The Emancipation Proclamation only came halfway into the Civil War. Now, I don't want to get diverted here. Here's what I'm saying. There were really bad guys who not only defended slavery, but basically made the argument that slavery was a positive good. Good not only for the master, good for the slave. Think about that. Even the Nazis didn't have the chutzpah to say what we're doing to the Jews is good for the Jews. The Nazis didn't go there. The Democrats did. So if you want to take down statues, go find John C. Calhoun, pull down his statues. Right? He was the prototypical Southern Democrat. You want to find another big defender of slavery? Roger Taney, James Buchanan, pull down their statues. Look at all these Democrats who were in the Ku Klux Klan. Obama and Clinton went to eulogize Robert Byrd at his funeral. How could you do that? Why is David Duke, who's on the margins of the Republican Party, why does the Republican Party bear the blame for Duke, whereas this whole procession of Klansmen is not only permitted? I mean, when Byrd died, Hillary made a video about how he was her mentor. She was mentored by a Kleagle of the West Virginia Ku Klux Klan. That's a fact. All right, let's keep going. Hello.
I don't know if you can answer this question with a simple answer, but why this topic? Like, why conservatism? Like, what jump-started your lecturing or so have you?
Yeah, I'll answer very briefly. I mean, when I came to America, I noticed two things. The first thing is I noticed that in this country, the ordinary guy has a really good life. And it really surprised me because in many countries, you have a really good life if you're a rich guy. And you have also a good life if you're extremely smart and work extremely hard. But I noticed in America that people who are not that smart and did work hard still live pretty well. They still had a nice house. Some of them had 2 cars. A few of them had pools. And I was like, wow, what a country. Even the lazy bum thrives over here. This is fantastic. Now, here's the point I want to make. I realize that that is because, not because the people in America are better than people anywhere else, but because the American system creates social mobility and opportunity. And we know that's true even now. I mean, you look at a family and you'll see one guy is the vice president of Oracle. His brother is pumping gas at the local gas station. Same genes, same social environment, and they end up in two totally different places. So that's America. No other country is like that. If you go to Europe right now and you find 10 rich guys, I guarantee you that the majority of them are from rich families. I'm not saying that there are no success stories, but it's rare. That's why everyone talks about it. I went to France a few years ago to collect some kind of an award, and someone told me, look at that man over there, he's a marquis. A marquis. That mentality of aristocracy, of titles, of position, we don't have that in America. So I like that about this country. And so I'm defending that ladder of opportunity. At the end of the day, if you want to know what my politics are based on, they're based on that.
Thank you for your attendance and your voice. Old visual metaphor for politics is like a pendulum of a clock that swings to the left, then comes and swings to the right. Just give it enough time, it'll swing back again, which is healthy for America, I feel, because it gives the people an opportunity to evaluate these policies and positions. Are they working? Are they apropos for where we're at today? And if not, well, forget those guys, we'll vote the new, okay? But recently, I'd say like within the last 15 years, I personally have felt, has that pendulum come unhinged from the clock, and it's just flailing aimlessly, you know? I want your personal take on the suggestion of term limits, whether that's nonsense or whether that would be an effective throttle to extremism to either side by minimizing career politicians.
If we look at American history, American politics has moved, by and large, and I would call it 40-year to 50-year pendulum swings. So I don't know if you were talking about pendulum swings from one election to the next. I don't think we see that. Yes, we do see people voted in and voted out. But from the 1820s, when the Democratic Party was founded by Andrew Jackson, till 1860, the Democrats were the majority party. They dominated the country. They dominated the court, they dominated the Senate, the House, and they usually had the presidency. There were a few Whigs, but they were carried by the Democratic tide. From 1865, end of the Civil War, to 1932, the Republicans were the majority party. They dominated the country. The Democrats dominated the South, but the GOP dominated the country. From 1932 to 1980, the Democrats became the majority party again for 50 years. And you had Republicans like Eisenhower in there, but they were carried by the Democratic tide. If you ask yourself, could Eisenhower have overturned the New Deal? No way. He didn't want to, but even if he wanted to, he couldn't. It was a Democratic era. Now, interestingly, from 1980 to now, in my opinion,